Hello, and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Toby Brooks. Dr. Brooks is a professor, performance coach, and host of Becoming UnDone. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Dr. Toby Brooks.
Well, Courtney, thanks so much. And please, no more doctor. We're friends now. Toby is just fine.
Fair enough, if you say so, okay? But no, thanks so much, Toby, for coming on. I am absolutely delighted to have you on the podcast because this podcast, of course, is all about like the life lessons we learn along the way, sport experiences, and our career experiences. And my goodness, we are going to be able to cover all of those in this podcast episode because you have achieved so much within academia as well as sports at large, multiple different levels there that we'll get into. So I would love for you to begin with an introduction and a background of yourself.
Yeah, well, you're far too kind. That was such a wonderful introduction. I do appreciate that. I'm at Baylor University right now, where I've been for the past 2 years. I'm the director of our Academy for Teaching and Learning. And I'm also a professor, clinical professor in our Department of Health, Human Performance, and Recreation, where I teach within our Masters of Athletic Training program. I teach some undergrad classes in anatomical kinesiology. And I'm also a student. I started back with my MBA a little after COVID. I actually had a podcast guest come on and say his job was kind of obliterated from COVID and he decided to get his MBA, and that kind of planted the seed for me. So I did that and it kind of relit the desire to be back in the classroom on the receiving end of things. So I'm working on my sixth degree now here at Baylor.
Wow, sixth degree. That is absolutely incredible. And, I would love to just start there first. So when we think about even just like you were talking about changing landscapes, especially with technology infiltrating different industries, what is your thoughts on the importance, even probably more so than ever, of continued learning and even continued education?
Yeah, I frequently say I don't want to be a year older. I want to be a year better. In this day and age, if you're resting on what you know, you're losing ground every day. And so for me, right now, the courses that I'm taking are specific to exercise physiology. They're courses that I either had 20 years ago or I never had in the first place. And it took some humility for me to say, I mean, I've got students in my classes that are my children's age, and I'm the old man in the room. But I think there's something to be communicated with that humility to say I don't know it all. I'm here to learn, and particularly in the sports science field, much of the technology that's used in Division One and professional sports didn't exist when I was working clinically, and I transitioned into a teaching role, and all that just really started to flourish and take root. And I could either continue to operate out of ignorance or I could put myself back in the classroom and back in the clinical setting. I do internship hours every week with our strength conditioning staff here to just kind of learn how things are done currently. Because if you're not actively pursuing it, the distance between you and that cutting edge just gets a little broader every day.
That is so incredibly true. And, as I reflect back, the love for education and learning, I felt like was instilled at such a young age. And to be able now, as you were just reflecting and speaking about it, but how important it is with how quick I think things are changing. And when you look at the technology use, just with different generations, I think that's what's so interesting because I learned so much from younger generations when it comes to social media because even in my generation, we did not necessarily grow up, for example, with social media. So just to your point, we could always be learning. And I think more so than ever, it's so incredibly important today, especially. And so I would love to kind of pivot into your background in sports. Particularly, I was doing some research before we, of course, got on with this conversation. And it's truly remarkable. You have over 2 decades of experience in higher education, but also professional college and high school sports. Now, Dr. Brooks, something that I struggled with was athletic identity. After after I came out of my undergraduate degree, obviously, like, really closed up shop with gymnastics on the physical side, would revisit, of course, in coaching a little later. But what is your advice for maybe not even athletes, but those who are maybe transitioning from different careers, career paths as well?
You're talking my language right now, and you're scratching several itches with that question. I don't know if you realized it or not, but I spent 2 years at the University of Arizona as a grad assistant working with the women's gymnastics team. So I saw firsthand what Division 1 and then at the time Pac-10 gymnastics was all about. And honestly, my whole show and platform and much of the work I do today, I could trace it all the way back. It was during COVID, the spring semester 2020. I was teaching a basically a sports psychology class. It had a different title, but the point being, we are in distance learning. We're sheltering in place, doing all that. And my students in my Masters of Athletic Training class were struggling. I mean, as we all were, but this massive pivot, they lost their clinical education assignment that they had. Psychologically, I could just sense that we weren't doing so well as a group. And so I decided to convene a panel discussion of former athletes. I had two former gymnasts who I had worked with at Arizona. One had married a baseball player who had gone on and played in the Cardinals organization, is now a minor league manager, a colleague who was a college basketball player, and another who had played football at Arizona. So I pulled this group together and just inoculated them, just like, okay, we're going to hear straight from these athletes what the transition out of sport was like. I think this will be really instructive for you as a future healthcare provider for athletes to hear what this is like. And I was not prepared for what I heard. These were folks in their mid 30s, early 40s, and as we got started talking and they started peeling back the layers, there was just so much hurt and unresolved just trauma and grief from losing something for a gymnast, as you know. I mean, they learn to walk and they're in the gym, and everything about their identity was wrapped up in this performance mindset. And for that to just suddenly end, my head coach at Arizona, Bill Ryden, my first week in the gym, I hadn't worked gymnastics ever. And he said, I'm in the reclamation business. You go to the football team or you go to the basketball team, they're trying to get to the next level to play professionally. No one in this gym is trying to be a professional gymnast. They are trying to put back together and make sense of what this experience has been for them. Their bodies are broken in many cases. Psychologically, they've been abused, even sexually in some cases, not in our gym, but we know that's rampant in the sport. But he said, it's my job over the next however many years I get with them to help them walk away from the sport with a healthy perspective. So in that panel discussion, we started off, oh, we're going to talk for an hour. We went the whole time and then some, like 3 hours. And people were just sharing, like, I never really thought about how central baseball was to who I am. And I never thought about, if I can't define myself as an athlete or as a gymnast, what's left? And so I left that conversation. Two things. I was burdened because I realized so many athletes I worked with had that same experience. And it was my story too. My story ended sooner than I wanted it to. It was just high school basketball for me, and I flirted with trying to play collegiately. But walking away was the hardest thing that I had ever done at that point. And what do I do now, right? And I realized that the athletes who need that support the most get the least. When you graduate from college, you don't have that athletic trainer or that team physician. They aren't assigned to you as a graduate or an alum. You're on your own. And that schedule that your coach was dictating to you that you've relied on your whole life, or maybe even you became as a senior on the team, like you're dictating to the younger team members, hey, we're getting to the hotel at 7. I mean, that regimented, it just suddenly evaporates. And now what do I do? And so that really is what Becoming Undone became. And I kept thinking, like, we go from feeling like we're in pieces, like the end of sport has left me kind of sitting in the fragmented remains of the life that I had imagined. But the high achievers among us recognize that they've got a purpose left unfulfilled. They're undone, they're unfinished. And so that's where the idea came for the show. And I've talked to athletes, I've talked to entrepreneurs, Navy SEALs, Olympic gold medalists. I mean, the the context changes, but the story is the same. Who we define ourselves as can be very temporary, and it's jarring and it is unsettling when that identity gets stripped away. For some, it's graduation. For some, it's injury. For others, they just walk away and want to do other things. But regardless, when that thing that I've associated myself with is pulled away, what's left? And for many folks, they can find themselves just kind of suffering for years without really realizing it. For others, somehow they're able to move on to the next thing and accomplish great things.
That is so true because that was something that was very difficult. And what I think is really interesting because you talk about even like the preparation for afterwards, as far as even resources to help the athlete, for example, after college. But that's exactly where I struggle. I knew it wasn't like you were oblivious to know that yes, you were going to have to get a job one day, especially from a gymnast standpoint. And I love how you highlighted that because the majority of gymnasts, we're seeing actually a little bit of a change in the sport, but for the majority, they're done after their college experience. And so you really do, you know that you're moving forward. But on the flip side, I feel like it doesn't even happen in that one moment of that last routine, but it's like, wow, I just graduated. I remember my father even asking me, like, what is next? And I'm like, that is the magical question, Dad.
100%.
But it really is. I'm so happy that we brought this up because I do. I think many, not even just athletes, but I think individuals throughout life as they transition into different careers maybe do experience that sense of, I don't want to say like identity crisis per se, but just a change in
Yeah.
identity.
I love that you touch on that. I refer to it as a purpose storm. In medicine, we talk about things like a thyroid storm. It's where it can be life threatening, but things go haywire. And the the thing that should my endocrine system should be leading my body to normal to be well adjusted, it kind of short circuits. And in that moment, I've got to get that athlete help. In a purpose storm, it's all psychological. I wonder, okay, if I'm not a gymnast, what the heck am I? If I'm not a collegiate athlete, what's left? How can I take what I've learned in that experience and apply that in a completely different environment? And it can be unsettling. It's jarring. I know a lot of Division One athletics in particular does a good job on kind of the career side and helping student athletes with that transition. But like myself, I mean, there are millions of people every day who have their dreams kind of take a different path. And in that moment, you're left with that decision like, what now? What next? And that purpose storm can be a very destructive thing. We see people turn to alcohol and drugs and all different types of addictions to cope. But for others, it's a chance to kind of tap the brakes, take inventory of what I've learned through these processes. Yeah, maybe I'm not going to become an NBA basketball player, but learning how to devote myself to a goal can spill over into a college degree or can spill over into a career. So those transferable skills are there. Lots of times it just hurts too much for us to realize it in that moment. So I'm sure you learned tons of things as a gymnast that help you today, but that day after you maybe handed that leotard into the equipment room for the last time, you didn't really have the ability to see that far into the future to really let it resonate.
That is so true. And you know what I was thinking of just as you were finishing there was the idea of exercising with purpose, for example. So you are finished in the gym, and obviously you would be training for that next season, competition season. But that was actually something physically that was a change as far as like, okay, now, yes, I do have to work out, but it's strictly for my health. And so, grabbing on to something, if it is maybe picking up running, if it's picking up something else. I know some individuals may go into like triathlons. That's pretty extreme. I've never done a triathlon, so I can't speak from that. But, training for something with a sense of purpose, I think as I reflect back, that is something that gymnastics kind of instilled in me was to hold on to that something. Like when you walk into a gym, there is purpose there, right? And so my question for you is Working with athletes, you were just mentioning the lessons. And of course, there's a multitude of different lessons, but what is maybe even just one main lesson that you have heard individuals, particularly athletes, speak about that they really did? They learned physically from their sport that really helped them in their professional careers.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm working on episode 152 right now. Not all of those are interviews, but over 100 interviews with high achievers. And I'm a qualitative researcher by training. Emerging themes are something that I'm always looking for. And while the stories may be vastly different, it may be an eight-figure entrepreneur who never played competitive sport versus an Olympic gold medalist. Without question, there's this idea of vision. And I always say strategic and purpose, relentless in pursuit, better every day. It starts with kind of reverse engineering. If I know I want to become someone that has 7 college degrees, that's not going to happen overnight. Okay, well, what do I need to do? Well, I need right now. I'm working on my sixth. Well, I can't get to 7 unless I finish six. So you kind of reverse engineer success. Um, I had an Olympic gold medalist in the high jump who had never competed track until his senior year. Spring semester of his senior year was the first time he had ever high jumped competitively. Didn't have a coach in high school. Uh, Charles Austin is his name, 96 gold medalist in Atlanta. And he goes to college and, very raw, but lots of athleticism. Obviously, he'd been more of a basketball player. And so Charles would say, like, I didn't discover my ability until pretty late, but once I did, then it was on. Like, and one thing I remember from my conversation with him was he shared with me how he was standing on the podium, gold medalist in the 96 Olympic Summer Games, and he was angry. And I said, Charles, what are you talking about? He said, no, I was pissed off. I said, you got to tell me more. Like, this is the culmination of everything an athlete works for to be an Olympic gold medalist. And he said, well, strategy wise, I didn't jump my best when I needed to. I could have had the world record, but I was just the gold medalist. And I remember thinking, my goodness, like just a gold, like that doesn't even compute with me. Like, how can you be just a gold medalist? And it just made me realize that for people who are high achievers, who are driven to perform, who are driven to be successful, a lot of times we can be our own worst enemies and we can fail to really drink. I love the fact that you're focused on the positive side of things. And it almost seems like for a high achiever to just be satisfied with myself that I did it. I achieved this goal. Maybe I wasn't the world record holder, but I'm a gold medalist by God. I think a lot of times we can rob the joy and the positivity out of the things we do because we're so focused on what comes next. And it's forced me, and in a good way, to be more present and to be more aware of when good things happen. It's okay to just allow yourself to breathe that in that moment and be cool with that. We'll worry about what's next tomorrow, maybe.
That is so true. I really do. I think in a world that is so fast paced today, the constant need or desire to keep, what is next? What is next? But actually just kind of situating yourself in the present, looking back maybe and seeing what you have accomplished, where you would like to go, and setting those goals, having that vision, as you mentioned. And what's so interesting when you were finishing that conversation about the just an Olympic gold medal, I'm, like, thinking, "You're right. How could you even, like, those words, that's incredible." And it made me think of perfectionism with high achieving athletes. And, we could certainly look at gymnastics. The perfect 10 is what we strive for. And so my question for you is just, at large with perfectionism, like, what have you seen with athletes, concerning perfectionism? And maybe if there is that sense of perfectionism with the athlete, how they are able to overcome that to be able to really succeed in their careers.
Yeah, man, such a great question, and it's one that can drive you to success. Like you don't become a Division One or whatever. You don't become an elite athlete settling for less than your best. But the dark side of that is if all you look at is perfect, I can't ever remember a time that I was perfect from the field and my opponent didn't ever score. Like there was no perfect game. And so you're setting yourself up to be disappointed every time you step on the floor, or in your case, in the gym. And so perfectionism is something that I think a lot of people really struggle with. And it is one that can make the pursuit of better a dark and lonely journey. And so, uh, Carol Dweck, famous for the mindset work she did in Stanford and several studies. But I was very much a fixed mindset person where I liked the praise and accolades that I got if I had good grades or if I played well. And what we find with fixed mindset is you so crave the positive affirmation that comes from success is you stop chasing things that would be a challenge. And so the growth mindset person, they don't care about wins and losses. One thing I do love about gymnastics is in college at least, you could literally not win a regular season meet at all and still be a national champion. Like if it just so happens that you're a tenth below the team you're competing with on that day, you lose the meet, right? And 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 that's foreign. Like in basketball, you've got to win some games to qualify for the tournament. So that perfectionist mindset is really linked to outcome. Like, what am I looking? Am I looking to get better today or am I looking to win today? And those are two decidedly different goals. If I'm focused just on getting better and the wins or losses take care of themselves, that's a very healthy, that's a growth oriented model. But a lot of perfectionists, they would prefer to compete against a lesser opponent as long, and maybe that means, I don't pursue the pre-med that I really want to do and I take an easier major, or maybe I um, elect to compete against people who aren't clearly better than myself. And so by kind of self-selecting an easier path, we don't encounter failure. And in that process, we don't grow from the experience. So it's one that I, excuse me, personally have wrestled with. I'd like to think that I'm not so much a perfectionist as just I want to get a little bit better. Like I said, I don't want to be a year older. I want to be a year better.
That's so true. And, as I reflect back, I really do. I feel that gymnastics in particular, as far as just like the experience that I had, this idea, I mean, physically falling, Dr. Brooks, I mean, it was like night and day. Like when you're learning a new skill and talk about like the idea of like, quote, failure. I don't necessarily believe in failure per se, but I think it's really interesting because I bring that up because in our career, that sport has been able to translate in ways of like trying new things even if they're not successful or in the eyes of society as successful, that you're still able to try something. And I think that's a very important lesson. I feel that I at least learned from gymnastics of letting go of that idea of the perfect 10 and striving for that, but then also looking at the good lessons that it taught me. I mean, literally, like you physically fall, you get back up. Well, in your career, you may not physically, of course, fall in your career, but you may figuratively or you get laid off. And how do you come back even that much more stronger? And so I love the lessons that sport teaches us, and I would love to pivot in a direction, as I had mentioned. I mean, just ultimate success that you've been able to achieve. Particularly, if I just list out your academic accomplishments, you've been a published author with more than 20 books and 30 peer-reviewed publications, a speaker more than 100 international, national, and regional events, and host of 2 podcasts. So, with that success, I would just love to hear because we see sometimes on the paper it's just all of this success, but during like the actual journey, there could be challenges, there could be setbacks perhaps. Is there any like particular setbacks, Dr. Brooks, that you would be willing to share as to how you overcame those challenges? Like any tips or advice along
Yeah.
the way?
I appreciate the question, and you're far too kind. It's interesting that someone would look at whatever your accomplishments are and view that as success. I just look at it as that's what I needed to get done in that given day or that given semester or that given season of life. But throughout the process, I would say um, I wrestled with being a clinician. I really wanted to work in the NFL or major D1 as a head football athletic trainer. I worked for one season at Liberty University, which at the time was not the highest level. And then I worked in the Arena League. I interned in the NFL, but I never really made it to that level. And the story I tell my students is I was actually on the road with Liberty, and my daughter, who is now a college graduate, this tells you how long ago this was. But she was less than a year old, and I was on the road with football. I plopped down after a long road trip. We'd been gone for 3 days, and my little girl, who was crawling around on the Thursday when I left, pops right up and runs over to daddy. And I was so proud of her in that moment, as any parent would be when their kid takes their first step, until I discovered it wasn't her first step. Her first step happened while I was on the road chasing my dream. And in that moment, the dream felt really insignificant and really unimportant because it felt selfish. Like, I want to be in the NFL because it's an impressive business card. And how many firsts am I going to miss? I can't be the dad or the husband or the friend that I want to be, working 60 hours a week, 7 days a week. And that was really the nature of the job at the time. It's still that way in a lot of places, but being an athletic trainer is long hours and thankless work. And I had my PhD at the time, and at that moment, I just thought something's got to change. I've got to uh, make a career pivot and go in a different direction so that I can be present. And so that was tough. It felt like I was kind of giving up on a dream. But at the same time, what I've come to appreciate after the fact is it wasn't so much that I was quitting on the dream as I was moving forward towards something, a bigger purpose. Again, I was undone. And that was kind of the first step for me. And today I've got students all over. I probably have a dozen students working in the NFL. And yeah, I don't get to brag about being that person, but I love the fact that I'm a part of their story and they're doing what my dream was. So it has a funny way of working out.
No, that's incredible, and I really do, that topic of discussion, if you will, of that, like, sense of, work-life balance or work-life harmony, certainly comes up a lot, and so, as you, reflect back in your career, I haven't even got to this part yet, and I was supposed to I wanted to start with this, but it really does, it has to do with your career. What actually, inspired you to go in the direction of human performance and maybe just like generally speaking, education at large?
Yeah. So my role today, I work primarily with younger faculty members and with educators at Baylor, so college educators. Uh, it really is kind of a funny story how it happened. When I got to Arizona, I wanted to work at a Division 1 sports in a Division 1 athletics department. My undergrad was at SIU Carbondale, which was kind of a mid-major, a smaller school. So I wanted to be, Power 5 conference. So I applied to every one that I saw, and Arizona was the first to offer me. So I end up there, super excited. They say they hired three of us at the time. We've got a spot with gymnastics, one with volleyball, one with football. And I thought to myself, I really want that football job. I would settle for volleyball. God, don't give me gymnastics. And sure enough, I got gymnastics. So I walk in, and I love the Olympics. And so I had watched, that was my exposure to gymnastics. Prior to that was just seeing the Olympic gymnastics team. So I walk in the gym, I meet my head coach, his dear friend today, Bill Ryden. He's a guest on my show, and he introduces himself, and he's literally he's an engineer. He was a rocket scientist who left. He was a competitive gymnast in college, worked in I think I don't remember where he worked, but in Denver, basically engineering ballistic missiles, and loved gymnastics so much that he quit his job and then got back into college coaching. So I meet this guy who's literally a rocket scientist, and he's teaching me a little bit about gymnastics. And I'm walking around the gym, and I'm like, my God, the word death is literally written on every piece of equipment in this facility. What have I gotten myself into? And so I ended up spending 2 years, and it was transformative. I got to see the inner workings of athletes that weren't wired the way any other athlete I had worked with was wired. And they were in many ways, incredibly elite and able to do things that I couldn't even imagine. And in other ways, like they were trained as gymnasts, not necessarily as athletes. So I had some things that I could help them with. The psychological aspect and the eating disorders and the abuse and relation. I wasn't prepared for that. And so it was a trial by fire. It was very much a formative experience. I wouldn't have chosen it. Clearly, I wanted to work football, but it made me a better clinician. It made me a better human being, frankly. But within that, I'm working all these hours. I went there to study. Once I got the job, they're like, okay, you get your master's degree paid for. I wanted to major in exercise physiology, but at Arizona at the time, it was a wet lab, kind of science based. It wasn't practitioner based. And so my work schedule didn't align with what I would have had to do in the lab. Every other GA at Arizona was in a program called teaching and teacher education. And so I'm like, all right, I'll try XFiz if it doesn't work. So after a week, I have to transfer out, out all the paperwork. And I kind of grumpily show up and I'm doing these teaching and learning classes. And my, excuse me, my very first professor uh, ended up being my dissertation advisor. And she just rocked my world. She opened my eyes to the fact that good teaching never just happens. It's a craft. You can work on it. You can be better at it. Yeah, some of us have better insights into what makes for good teaching and whatnot, but this is something that you need to study to get better at. And so I kind of moved forward as a clinician and I'm acquiring these skills of what it means to be a better teacher. And along the way, what I'm kind of gathering is kind of an insane work ethic because that's what athletic trainers do. So once I made that decision to get out of clinical practice, everything else felt like part-time work. Like, what do you mean I don't have to work 40 hours? And what do you mean I get weekends off? And so that's why I filled it with things like podcasts and writing books. I mean, I was trained as an athletic trainer to work 7 days a week from the 5th of July until we lost our last game, whether that was a bowl or whatever. And so it it wasn't something that I would recommend for a lot of people, but it definitely kind of formed me in a way that made everything else feel like I was just kind of coasting. Like this is easy by comparison. And I don't know you as a competitive gymnast can relate to that. Like the schedule you kept to be a competitive gymnast pales in comparison. Like what you do today pales in comparison to that level of discipline and commitment and workouts. Like everything else feels kind of like a vacation, but it's still really good compared to the rest of the population, right?
So, that is so true, Dr. Brooks. I mean, when I look back, it's almost like it was a different work in my prime. I would say like 13, about 13 years old, roughly. I know that sounds crazy for an athlete, but nevertheless, for a gymnast, that's pretty common. And so there I was like 13, and literally, it was no exaggeration. It was 6 hours. We got out of school early just to make the practice, and it was 5 days a week. And talk about like, literally, that was almost like essentially a full-time job alongside school. And so that's all you know. And then you're right, like when you go into like I remember going into some of my academic programs where at that point I was done with gymnastics and you're thinking to yourself like how do I fill the rest of my time? Like I should be working here. How many hours that I used to? So
100%.
absolutely. I totally agree with you with that. And as we're speaking, I was just reflecting, with your children, like not children obviously anymore. I know they're grown at this point, but what maybe is some advice with your extensive experience in academia as well as in sports that you have been able to pass on to your daughters? Is it daughters? I'm
I have
sorry.
a daughter who just graduated from Texas Tech and a son who's a sophomore at Lubbock Christian.
Wonderful. So, like, is there any particular advice that you have been able to offer them through your extensive experience?
Yeah, I always say, your professor is hired to help, and you really owe it to, if you're struggling, you need to let them know. And so office hours, a lot of I was a first generation college student. I didn't know what an office hour was. I just assumed if I saw that on a syllabus, like that's when they're in their office working. Don't disturb them. An office hour is just the opposite. It is time that that faculty member has set aside to whatever concerns you have, come in to my office and we'll talk about it. So use the office hours. If you've gotten feedback on a paper or an exam or something that didn't make sense to you, go talk about it. I mean, email and impersonal communication is never the way. There's a meta to this that I think a lot of college students miss. Yeah, I'm there to get a grade and I want to eventually graduate, but I'm also learning how to deal with people. And so, why would I text or message, go into the Canvas or whatever the learning management system is and send them a message? That's very impersonal. I would rather them learn how to have a productive conversation with someone that they respect and is above them, as opposed to just a short email to get what I need to get out of them. So it was amazing. My daughter went away to the University of Oklahoma as a freshman, and she was a really good student in high school. And um, we sent her off, and she's 5 hours from home. And I remember just how sad I was that she was gone and how difficult that was for me. And after a year, she decided to transfer back home to Texas Tech at the time. And I was basically treating her, in my mind at least, exactly the way I had when I dropped her off at Norman. So she comes back and we're like, okay, we need to get you registered for classes and stuff. And so we walk in and I start to get ready to have a conversation with the bursar or whoever it was. And she just steps right up and I'm like, whoa, like you have changed in this year away from college. And so I think for parents, it's important to realize that you're not the only one going through it. Your student is changing. They are growing. You need to give them room and give them space. And maybe it's not perfect. Maybe they do make a mistake. She didn't. She got everything done. But in that moment, I realized, like, I don't need to fix this. She just needs to know I'm here to support her, but I want her to do this. And so I really do kind of lean in, like, learn to be a good communicator in college. Don't just get a grade. And that could go for, if you're in a group project, it's tempting. I hate group projects. I want to do all the work and turn it in, and we'll be perfect and it's fine. That's not what that's for. Like, learn to communicate. If you're feeling slighted as the thing's going on, communicate that. If I wait till the last minute, it's really not fair for me to blast that person on the evaluation and say they didn't do their part. Learning to communicate is a critical skill. And that holds true whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the gym.
Like how you highlight the communication skills, because I tell my students all the time, it's exactly what you were speaking about. I know if I go back to my 20-year-old self, 21-year-old self, I was still developing my confidence almost even as a young woman, to be able to speak to a professor. And I tell them all the time, the majority of the time, I was very reserved, very shy, especially when I entered college. To your point, there was definitely a transformation in college with Courtney Gladys at the time. But I tell them about how important it is to have that like eye contact, face to face conversation, especially today where it is. You're right. And I'm glad you mentioned that. It's easy to, shoot an email, but to actually like maybe like 10 minutes after class, I always tell them, like, I'm here, I'm always there early before class, but then also after. If it's simply, career, to talk career, if it's about a certain assignment, but you're right, you're having that interaction with that sense of authority, but you're also being able to practice your communication skills. And I feel like today they're getting more and more important when we talk about communication skills in the workforce and that
Yeah.
teamwork that you mentioned.
Yep.
Um,
And I would add to that, I work with a lot of faculty members and I have come across a few, but not many, a few who aren't really looking for more interaction with students. The vast majority, they would love it if you would go have a conversation with them during office hours. Like, I oftentimes say they pay me to do the admin and the email, but the conversations with students, I would do those for free. I love having a chance to maybe speak some life into a student, give them some inspiration or encouragement or just to listen, just shut up and listen. And that can't happen unless that student allows me or it comes into my space and allows me to have that relationship with them. I can't solve problems that I'm not aware of. And so a lot of times students are kind of walking with concerns, but if they don't share those, I can't help them. I don't have to solve it for them, but I can at least help you talk through the potential solutions that you could approach. But if you don't ever come to talk to me, that's not a conversation that ever happens.
Absolutely. And to your point, I mean, during that semester, if there is concerns going on behind the scenes, to wait till the last second would be the worst thing. And so at least if you are proactive about that, and that's a very good point to disclose to students right when that semester starts, to not be afraid to go up to them as far as the professor goes. But Dr. Brooks, I would love to go in a direction, like I said, with your extensive experience, particularly in education, like we spoke about technology, like what excites you about the future of education just at large?
It's funny because it seems like there is no middle ground. People either love AI or they hate AI. They're using it all the time or they never want to touch it. I have leaned in pretty heavily. I use it in my podcast production. That was kind of a proof of concept for me. I'm able to get so much more done. I know with Riverside, there's a lot of AI things that it will generate reels and you can edit transcripts, and there's so many cool things that it will do. But then on the promotion side, and the second podcast that I launched was actually just something I wanted to add as a supplement to one of the classes I was teaching. I thought students they're not reading their textbook. How could I deliver something that they could listen to from their dorm room to the classroom? 10 minutes while you're walking to class. This is like a primer for learning. And I never would have been able to do that without the help of AI. Now I'm not just mindlessly one prompt and it spits out a done product. So the A in AI, I always say it's augmentation. It's not artificial. I'm using a tool that allows me to produce more things, but ultimately they're still my things. It's not something I've completely advocated the responsibility and handed it off to ChatGPT to write my course syllabus or my PowerPoint for the day or whatever. But that AI tool is allowing me to produce better quality work. It's deeper and it's broader. So typically, prior to 3 years ago when ChatGPT really launched, I felt like I could either cover something with a lot of depth. We're not going to cover a lot, but we're going to really dig in, or it's an inch deep and a mile wide, where we're just going to broadly overview. And I just didn't have the bandwidth to do anything other than one of those two options. And now, with the help of a myriad of AI tools, I can produce a proposal in a matter of a day that would have taken me a month before. I can edit a script that I'll use for a podcast in an hour, and it might have taken me 6 hours before. So it allows me to do a lot more, and frankly, it's better when I compare. Now, the one caveat I put to that, and I warn my students and my kids in particular, I have created some personas in ChatGPT, trained it on my own writing, and so you go to custom GPTs and you can, I uploaded, all those manuscripts you referred to. I uploaded those so that what it spits back out is written more like the way I write. So I would say nothing I ever use AI for comes out 100%. But if it's 75% of the way there and then I can edit and tweak, that's a heck of a lot easier than 0% of the way there and starting from scratch. But the problem with that is I've written all of this or organically pre AI stuff, and I've got a library of my own writing, whereas a student today doesn't have that. And so if they're starting right out of the gate using AI tools, they're not really developing their own voice yet. And I can't train that thing to write the way I write if I haven't really defined how I write. So that's a real challenge I see for younger folks who have not been forced to do a lot of production or creation without the assistance of AI is how do you know what's really you and what's really more the tool? So in a way, I guess I'm thankful that I'm old there.
No, absolutely. And this is an excellent conversation to have because I really do. I think when the conversation, because I know it's been around, but the conversation was getting heavier with AI, this idea of critical thinking, you know, my generation, I mean, we ChatGPT, of course, like just came out in what, 2022. And to be able to know that you had that foundation of knowledge, that you know how to not even just think, but to critically think, to really analyze something and to have that foundation of knowledge set before you utilize the capability of AI to enhance your work. So that idea that yes, now the information, it is out there. You could get it if you want. But I think the key to what you were saying too is, do you understand it? Do you understand it to ask those like higher level questions, those quote like better questions? So I really do. I think that's a really good point that you make for those younger generations coming up, literally with AI and not just foundational knowledge without AI. I think that's so interesting. It's territory I feel like we're entering into that we've never really entered
Yeah.
into before.
Yeah. And that's been interesting for me to be on the receiving end of the student professor relationship. I see, I'll open a syllabus and no AI is allowed at all in this class. Any violation would be turned into, disciplinary action. I'm just the opposite. I'm trying to figure out how to put the tool in your hand, not for the sake of cheating. Like I could give you my old assignment and you could use AI to build that old assignment in 20 minutes and turn it in and it's okay. Or I could teach you how to wield this tool and be critical of what's coming back at me. What's wrong with this? What are the holes? Where is it missing? Maybe the references are completely fabricated. I mean, there are ways that you can use this tool as an educator that enhances the learning process. It's not just a cheat tool. It can be. If I'm not careful in how I assign things, absolutely I could use it to completely and there are actually tools I saw 2 weeks ago, I think, a new tool came out that it would basically serve as a persona in an online class and it would take the tests for you. It would answer chat board discussions. I mean, it would essentially do the course for you and you're completely hands off. That technology is out there. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how can you emerge from this learning experience in my classroom better for having used this tool. To me, it's no different than if we're doing an art class. If you've got a camera, you can produce a different kind of art than if you've got a pencil and a pad. The tool doesn't change the fact that that eye of the artist is still a critical skill to develop. It can change the quality. I know that what I'm able to capture with a camera is vastly superior to what I'm able to capture with a pencil and a pad. But I think AI and our uh, software, our word processing tools are kind of similar in that regard. I don't want to use it so that I'm not doing work. I want to use it so that I can work maybe in a deeper and wider way.
No, absolutely. And I really do. I think it's important to be able to prepare students for life beyond the classroom. So I'm the same way, like personally, just in my own opinion, the ability to utilize AI to enhance, because once you enter into that workforce, and I think that's what's been interesting is having like one foot out of academia, but then also seeing like the private sector and how it's being utilized and kind of in some capacities really infiltrating some industries. So having at least some foundational knowledge that when you do walk into that first job or that first internship, it's not completely foreign.
Yeah. Yeah. Right now, I mean, I won't drop specific names, but a private school education is upwards of $300,000 for a 4 year degree. So if you went to a Duke or a Vanderbilt or a Baylor, or fill in the name there, 300K. If you don't get any skills on how to use AI and you've spent $300,000 and you go in as the bright, newly minted undergraduate student, they're going to laugh you out of the building. Not only do you not have the skills to do the job, you've incurred this massive either debt or expenditure along the way. Like, I feel like it's a true disservice to a student to not equip them with the skills that they need, particularly in professions where AI, healthcare, certainly, yeah, we use that for documentation. Law, it's becoming a thing. Like, if our approach is we just don't use it because it's an integrity issue, we have not prepared that student for what they're going to encounter day one on the job, and that's not fair.
That's so true because I look back at my experience and in college definitely does its job when it comes to the technicality, like just dependent upon what major you major. Like, for example, I feel like college certainly helped me prepare for my major and in different capacities, of course, like just through different levels of education. But I will say the importance now to prepare for life and the real world applicability is becoming such an important factor alongside of the actual like major, the foundation of the major, but how you apply it. The emotional intelligence, I think,
Yes.
is really, really important. So, Dr. Brooks, I cannot let you go with just one broad general question. So, like I said, I mean, just extensive experience across all levels of sport, high school, college, and professional. What are you seeing right now as a trend that's encouraging or perhaps kind of surprising, making you nervous?
Yeah. One of the reasons I got back into the classroom and am back doing some clinical hours now is this explosion of data and sports science as a profession. So it's been maybe 10 years ago that we saw the kind of introduction of catapult, the GPS systems that track movement and speed and overtraining. And a lot of, the general population, they'll see, oh, I paid good money to go to this NBA game and the player I want to see is out for load management. There's been some challenges associated with this embrace of sports science. We've got more data than we've ever had, but just having data doesn't do anything. We have to make responsible data driven decisions. And so I think what I've seen in sport in the past decade in particular is our fidelity and the types of data we're able to capture is better than it's ever been. I can tell pretty quickly and easily whether or not you're overtrained, whether or not it would behoove you to not compete tonight, things like that. We're still in our infancy. We're not doing much in the way of mental preparation, mental health. Just helped out with a book called Strong Mind, a guy by the name of Will Fleming. He's uh, a former competitive weightlifter, and he's now he coaches with Team USA. But his book, Strong Mind, he's got some great tools in there so that we can kind of track readiness and preparation. And the best coaches know when to press on the brake and when to hit the gas. And the data allows you to know on a given day or in a given week where that athlete is. If I press on the gas when he or she needs me to hit the brakes, I'm going to grind them to a pulp. They're probably going to get injured. At the very least, their growth is going to be hampered. On the other hand, if they're pretty healthy, sometimes maybe they're just lazy. They don't want to work. Other times, maybe they just don't know. I mean, the transition from one level to the next. It takes you a while to get acclimated to this is how we train here. Like, that's so much harder than it was. So you might have a college freshman who doesn't know what they're capable of. And so they're tapping the brake and the coach is like, look, all the data is telling me you're ready. You could PR today based on this force plate data that I have. And so that allows us to coach in a way. Great coaches are always great coaches. And I get that. And there's kind of a gut reaction to this to know when it's time to push and when it's time to pull. My high school basketball coach would always say sometimes, no, he would say, every athlete either needs a hug around the neck or a kick in the pants. It's my job to figure out which one of those on a given day is what's appropriate. And so for that athlete that's ready to push, if I just tap you on the back and say, hey, it's okay, shut it down today, we've just left growth on the table. You're not going to be as good as you could have been. And then the flip is if they're really overtrained already, and we're like, hey, let's train till we lift till you puke, like we've done damage there as well. So I love the data driven aspect of it. I'm anxious and hopeful that the psychological readiness will follow suit, because an athlete is not just muscles and nerves. They are a living, breathing, reactionary, beautiful organism. And the mind is as critical a part as any. And, your platform in terms of positivity makes that I can change the nature of how I train today just by simply deciding that this is going to be a great workout. Likewise, I could be ready and I could just say, I'm not feeling it today. Poor me. And it's going to suck. And that's all between my ears. And so I'm anxious and curious and hopeful that the mental side will catch up with the physical.
That's so true. I really like how you drive home the mental health aspect of sports in general, just across all levels. Because I know when I was climbing through the ranks, this was early 2000s, the topic of mental health, quite frankly, like didn't exist. I didn't at least know what it was. And so how far we have been able to come, but still, I mean, when I look at that sport, you're right. I mean, heavily physical training, but the mental preparation, especially when you go from elite level to then transferring into college, I mean, the hours of working out drastically shifts. The mentality of being able to endure a competition season of many more competitions in comparison, of course, to club level, elite level gymnastics has changed. Well, it's always been there, but I'm just saying as far as the athlete transitioning, so that mental aspect, the preparation and time, everything coming together is so important. And you're right, there's so much data out there, but bringing that mental side of it with alongside of the data, I think is going to be so important moving forward. So, Dr. Brooks, I would love to round out this podcast episode, amazing podcast episode at that, but with a positive message or a positive quote for our community.
Yeah. One of my favorites is "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor." And that is powerful for me in thinking that sometimes the storm comes so that I learn how to navigate it. And when I get to the other side of it, I'm better equipped for whatever's going to come at me next. So that's probably one of my favorites.
Well, that's fantastic because you're right. You never know what like that season is preparing you for next. So, Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, sharing your extensive knowledge in academia and sports at large. Truly grateful to have you on the
Well,
podcast.
my pleasure, and I'd love to return the favor. I'm always game to have a former athlete on the show to kind of talk through your transition. So that offers there.
Thank you so much for that invitation. And I will take you up on that, Dr. Brooks. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.